Hi, it's been a while. I've had a very busy past 6 months. I think it's been 6 months since my last video anyway. I've been writing this one for about a month now, if you couldn't tell from the runtime. But I'm officially back, so that's good. Had a very busy year, but I think I'm starting to settle down again, and I wanted to go over another roguelike that I've been playing recently, other than The Binding of Isaac, and that would be Risk of Rain 2. I'm going to do a follow-up video talking about everything that's happened with me over the past year and where the channel is going forward, because my life has changed a lot. It's going to keep changing a lot, but the one thing that's not going to change is the fact that I'm still uploading on this channel. It is looking like more longer form content over the next few months, which, you know, if you find that good, that's good. If not, I might change it up again, who knows. Originally I had intended on filming this in person, but that didn't really work out, so this got delayed by like a week because I really tried making it work. But from every video from here onwards, they will hopefully be in person. I'm trying to get a bit more personal with my channel, so this I think would be a good step. However, let's just jump right into the video. Risk of Rain 2 is a very interesting title for a game, considering most people don't really know what Risk of Rain means. There's not really a lot of rain happening in the game, and there's not really much of a risk of it happening as well. A lot of games sees you killing enemies to get gold, to get items, to get to the boss, to do that 5 more times so you can get to the final boss, and then you can beat the game on probably drizzle difficulty if this is your first time, which is fair. This is a hard game, and this entire time the clock is catching up to you. The enemies are getting more health and deal more damage every minute. Almost like while you're going through your run, everything is so clear, but there's always a risk. You need items and drones to give yourself an edge, increase your stats, gain on-hit effects, proc chain, defense buffs, on-kill effects, proc chains, more allies, more you, more missiles, more proc chains. The buzzword of the century, proc chains, are the equivalent to the elixir of life for alchemists, combining items until they create chains of on-hit effects from their own on-hit effects. Don't understand it? Good, because no one does. You just keep playing and eventually it happens. And that, and so much more in this episode of Everything Risk of Rain 2 doesn't tell you. This guide is intended for players with a moderate amount of experience already. I'm going to assume you know the basic game loop and have maybe gotten to the final boss once or twice. I will be progressively talking about more and more of the game's mechanics and secrets as we go along in the video, so if there's something you're trying to avoid, you'll have a fair notion of when to click off the video. Risk of Rain 2 is a game about discovery and optimization. You spend your first half of the game experience discovering all of its mechanics, and then you spend the second half optimizing those mechanics. This video is for the latter. If you're playing the game for discovery, do not watch this video because I'm going to be spoiling everything. However, if you're here for optimization, this is exactly where you want to be, to learn numbers and how everything interacts with each other, and just how to get better runs out of your, well, runs. For anyone who just bought a DLC and would like to learn about everything within that DLC, I will be talking about the DLCs and base games separately. So first is the base game, and then I'll be going through Survivors of the Void and then Seekers of the Storm. So if you're looking for any of those, it should be chaptered in the bottom. But I suppose without any further ado, let's just get straight into it. Before you actually load into a map, you have a few options to make. Pressing single player will load you into a lobby to pick your survivor, difficulty, and anything else you need. Don't worry about any gaps you see in these menus, as a lot of those will be filled in progressively as we go through the video. Naturally, I suggest you play on drizzle difficulty for your first attempt and work your way up to monsoon at a rate you're comfortable with. 99% of the challenges in this game can still be beaten on easy difficulty, so you're not missing out on too much other than just a few skins and a harder game. In the main menu, you also have access to alternate game modes to change up the pace of the game. Eclipse is like New Game Plus mode, where every time you win, a new modifier is added, and your progress is tracked differently between survivors. So this game mode is made for diehards and sweats, while Prismatic Trials are set seeds that people can play to race against each other. Personally, I feel like the best way to go through the game would be to go through the game as you would naturally progress, i.e. talk about the maps. So we'll start with all the stage 1 maps, and then we'll slowly work our way up to stage 6, and we'll fill in any in-between stages as well that aren't part of the normal progression system. First map on our list is Distant Roost, one of my favorites personally. You'll notice as soon as you spawn into here or the other one that you'll just find an open area with chests, shrines, drones, enemies, and a glorious portal. Ideally, you'll want to keep your run as efficient as possible, because every encounter with enemies only gets more dangerous, and even if you outpass them, you're not immune to being one-shot. well, okay, technically you do have protection from being one shot above 90% of your health, but look at this and keep track of how many shots are flying. When an enemy makes an attack at you, then there's only two outcomes. It hits you or it misses. Healing covers the first and movement covers the second, and then these two stats are also going to be your safety net for the rest of the run. Personally, I only use damage for getting past bosses, seeing as most enemies can be handled fairly easily with your base skills at this point. And when you play on Monsoon, you have near to no natural health regen, so please, for the love of Providence, get some health regen. If you manage to get a white item on the first stage that you don't really like that much, then you're better to just try your chances with the 3D printer. It'll let you exchange one item for another one of the same rarity that will just take from your inventory at random. Scrapping a white item will prioritize it instead, but it will lose any effects it had. Personally, I like to ping the 3D printers if they have a specifically good item, because I'm a little stupid, and if I don't ping it, then I'm going to forget that it was ever there to begin with and go on to the next stage with like 7 pieces of scrap. And my personal favorite interaction in the entire game, the endorphin machine. These shrines of pure ecstasy, don't listen to the media, have me quoting that one gambling meme I see in my feed all the time for obvious reasons.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it!
These trance shrines will have a chance of giving you an item at a discounted rate less than a small chest. At least it is at first. I paid for the item, I'm getting the item. However, if you cannot afford the Balatro machine, then the shrine economy has you fixed, brother. We got blood banks that do not discriminate between anything. Got your winnings from the Pachinko emulator? Then the shrine economy has you sorted once again. Take your winnings over to the teleporter boss and fight 2 of them for 2 awards. It's very simple. I'll explain in terms that you'll understand. 2 slot machines means 2 times the payout. I always take these since if you're scared you can't beat 2 of the bosses, then you probably can't even take on 1, and you might as well try your chances if you're struggling anyway. But, you know, maybe I am overblowing this whole shrine gambling relation. Like, what other kind of shrines are there? Like the one that transforms all your items into 1 at random? Oh, and then there's Shrine of the Woods as well, because I like a pint while I'm gambling. Chest. Large chest. Categorized chest. Equipment barrel. Multi-shop. Equipment multi-shop. I feel like all of these are pretty self-explanatory. So much so that I don't have to go into excruciating detail about each. However, for the sake of skimming over them anyway, starting with regular chests, the chances are at like 80%, 19%, and 1% split between whites, greens, and reds. I know the numbers are not exact because you have to take into account the amount of items in each pool and the pool that it's actually taken from as well, but you know, general guidelines. Large chests have an 80-20 split between greens and reds and go for twice the normal rate of a standard chest. Category chests are chests that are slightly more expensive than a standard chest with the same chances, but guarantee an item from each category, like red for damage, health for green, and utility for purple. These ones aren't about if you should take them based off what they contain, because you should take every item you find. But when to take these is the more important question. If you find a green chest and you're doing pretty good on health items, maybe come back for it later, because you know you won't need the health right now. Equipment barrels give you equipment, which are strong items that give you new abilities, however you can only hold 1 at a time. Multi-shops give you a choice of 3 items at a standard rate, and then there's the equipment equivalent too. Also, there's invisible chests, but I've only ever found like 2 because they're invisible. There's just so many ways of obtaining items and only one of you to obtain all of them. Well, unless you have friends, but I know you don't. Generally, I do a quick scan of the map and grab any chests I can afford, do the portal, and then scan again for any chests I miss, but can afford now that I've done the teleporter. As well as that, it's good to note any scrappers or 3D printers around the map in case you get an opportunity to optimize your run. Got an item that's not really pulling its weight? Scrap it. Like I said before, scrap is prioritized by its respective printer, so you're not at risk of losing any of your other items. Literally, just stop off at the scrapper every so often and you might come out with like maybe like 3 or 4 in the early game, but find one crowbar printer and suddenly you have like 7. Personally, even from stage 3 onwards, if I find a printer that has an S tier item or a key item for my build, for example I have crit effects but no lens maker glasses, and I find a 3D printer for lens makers, boy, you know I'm doing it at least once. If I have like 20 plus items, it's worth it. Unless it isn't. God, what were we talking about again? Oh yeah, the first stage! So, well, that's everything. Frankly, it's what you're going to find on most maps. Distant Roost has no notable qualities as a map. It has an alternative version where the islands are linked, which I much prefer. You'll find your way to the teleporter and wipe the boss. At this point, I'm sure you have no issues with the first boss, even with a couple of items and Shrine of the Mountain enabled. Don't feel bad for leaving the teleporter radius as well. It doesn't diminish, so if you're getting overwhelmed, just step outside and fill up on some bungus. Or wungus if if you prefer. If you found a Newt altar earlier and used a lunar coin to activate it, then a blue portal will spawn at the end of the teleporter event. This also just has a 25% chance of happening in any stage anyway. Going through said blue portal will bring you to the Bazaar Between Time, a great place if you want to take your run in certain directions. This is where you'll spend most of your lunar coins. These have a 0.5% chance of dropping every time an enemy dies, and then you can unlock more from certain achievements and beating the final boss. For 2 coins a pop, you can get a lunar item. These tend to have strong, sometimes run-defining effects, but come with an equally potent downside. Usually. Some of these have weaknesses that can be exploited way more than others, so you'll find ones that you just naturally gravitate towards anyway. Experiment. It's not like you're getting any better if you don't. Rerolls get more expensive each time due to lizard trickle up economy. Kill him for me if you ever get the chance, by the way. You can spend 5 lunar coins to unlock the Artifice versus Survivor, highly recommend. And finally, you can choose your next stage, which is helpful if you're going for a certain achievement. But I hear you saying, but how do I do it if it's only by chance? Well, you sad, pathetic little man. You can find these Newt altars around a map that guarantee a blue portal to spawn at the cost of 1 shekel. Oh, and also you can find lunar pods around the map that cost 1 coin and give a lunar item. I felt that one was better to just shove in here. And also within the bazaar are these cauldrons that will let you sacrifice 3 white items for a green item or 5 green items for a red item. Always check this because red items can be very run defining. If you want to know the location to all these Newt altars, you can find them here, here, and here. You can also check all of these on the wiki fandom. Titanic Plains is the other stage 1 map, also with a variant, so that's 2 maps, 1 variant each, 4 possibilities. Unless you count the door that's also sometimes opens, but that's a weird thing to bring into this. Titanic Plains has nothing going for it, really. It's just another stage 1 map, but at least it's very easy to get around. I get more nostalgia loading this one up compared to Distance Route, just don't at me. On to the second set of stages, we got the Abandoned Aqueducts, where Disputed Origins taught me how to roll barrels after I rewatched that video like 20 fucking times. There's buttons around the map that you can press down to activate. However, there is 2 of them, and there's usually only 1 of you, so you have to figure out something to, fix that. If you're playing on your own, you have a few options. If you're playing Engineer, the stationary turrets will press down the buttons. Loader's Pylon will press it down, but that's a really hard one to do. Captain's Orbital Supply Beacons, any of them can do it. Pick whichever one you want. Effigy of Grief will also do it, and Lunar Coins will also do it, which you can use by killing beetles on the button or spawning with Kill Me Please.
I want to die.
Activating these 2 buttons will open a door introducing you to Kajaro and Renald, 2 Elder Lemurians who will drop their respective bands to run defining items for any burst damage build, and definitely worth getting if you can, but like I said, barrels. There's a few great tutorials on how to roll them properly, but there's a reason I haven't beaten Eclipse 8. These buttons can be found at these locations, but I always end up spending too long looking for them. Also, Newt altars can be found here, here, and here. For Abandoned Aqueducts, less prestigious sibling, we have the Wetland Aspect, which sadly doesn't house 2 run-defining items, but it does house a red hidden under the ground. If you go near the far end of the map by the cliff edge, you'll find an alcove, and at the end you'll find Nukahana's Opinion. Personally, I find its item pretty fun, but in fairness, I only ever find it in runs where it already fits my build. This paired with some rejuvenation racks as well, and you're going to be out-damaging enemies with heals. Other than that, Newt altars can be found here, here, and here. To start off stage 3, we have Scorched Acres, the most stylish map of the 2, if you ask me, and I'll take browns over whites any day. You got these floating islands with geysers and narrow bridges connecting them, as well as more oil-based enemies roaming around. Other than the pretty scenery, though, you don't really get much else going on here, other than the Newt altars, which can be found at these locations. In Rally Point Delta, we get a little bit more substance in this frigid military outpost with no toilets, I'm just saying. If you manage to get here within 15 minutes, you can find this timed chest, and if you open it, you'll get a Prion accumulator, which is pretty much the BFG from Doom. This is a great way for new players to be rewarded for kicking it up a step, because damn do you feel godly the first time you use this thing. The timed chest can spawn at 1 of 3 locations. And you've probably been a big fan of all the drones you've been picking up along the way as well, but what if they got swole? Introducing the TC-280, also known as the fodder f***er. This beast comes in at a whopping 400,000 horsepower with machine guns and missiles, and you can ride on its back. This sucker is so expensive you'll be maxing out your executive cards just to front the deposit, but if you can, you should. Not for any logical reasons, but when I look up at my TC-280, I feel like I've already won. Around this point in your run as well, you may come across these shrines of gold, and you know how much I love shrines. Activating this for a whopping gajillion dollars will spawn a gold portal at the end of the teleporter event, bringing you to the Gilded Coast. Here, there's not much other than some enemies, some chests, and 7 pillars that can be activated with gold. Activating enough will bring out Aurelia Knight, deity of Aura, and you are here to challenge him. Pay your toll to break his defense and deal bursts of damage. Take too long and you'll have to pay another toll. If you do manage to defeat him, he'll fist bump you and join your party, showing up for any teleporter events in the future to help you out. Most people avoid Aurelia Knight since it can take time out of your run, but they're simply not considering one thing, Aura. Moving on to stages 4, we got 3 of these fellas and all of them come with a way of getting a red item, so let's start off with the easy one, Hell. The Abyssal Depths is where all my hopes and dreams ended up. Landing here you'll find a lot of imps and elder Lemurians, which you want to make sure you don't let them get too close. Underneath this rock you'll be able to find a legendary chest with approximately 16 times the cost of a regular chest and guarantees a legendary. Yeah, I could have mentioned these when I was talking about chests earlier, but 95% of this time you'll find them here, and on the other map they're guaranteed to spawn. Normally I go find out how much it is, go kill enemies until I have enough, get distracted when I see a pretty item, spend all my money, do the teleporter event, and buy the legendary chest. If I'm low on cash, these Shrines of Battle usually up my gains by a good bit. Shrine Economy always has my back. This map also features a massive, second half that can only be accessed some of the time, but if it is open, there will be extra loot with about 10 small chests in there, so happy hunting. Nude altars can be found here, here, and here. Sundered Grove is the brother to Abyssal Depths, also containing a legendary chest, but it's not in a fixed spot this time. It can be found in these 5 areas. These small pink mushrooms do give away its location, so you can find it fairly easily. Other than that, you have an abundance of mushroom enemies who aren't that much of a threat once you get around to dealing with them. Personally dislike this map just because of the brightness, though that's probably my fault for having my desk next to my window. Other than that though, there's just too many jumps I think I can make, but I can't. Newt altars are here, here, and here. Siren's Call is my personal favourite of the tree because I get to shoot a lot of big birds, especially the round ones. This map is mostly a vulture's nest, hence the vultures, who've befriended Solus units, hence the Solus units. Anger the birds too much by destroying these eggs you can find around the map, and you'll spawn an ally worship unit as a boss fight. Defeating it will spawn a red item. This is one of my favourite bosses in the game, mostly because I always end up having a prolonged fight with it that always feels pretty close, but usually I come out on top. It's fun. Nude altars can be found here, here, and here. On to the second to last map, because there's only 2 left as there's only 1 map per stage. Sky Meadows was the only stage 5 map for so long. The map features one of the most banger tracks on the whole soundtrack, along with these parent and grandparent enemies that look way more intimidating than they actually are. Don't get me wrong, they are scary, but not that scary. Underneath the map you will find the compound generator, which has a very strange but useful use that I think we'll save for later. You'll notice the teleporter is slightly different as well. Interacting with the outside will change its destination from the moon, where the final boss is, or back to the planet, looping you back to stage 1 with all your items so that you can keep getting stronger. I always recommend looping at least once. Unless you need this win and have a perfect build, looping is just fun. You get to start scrapping a large amount of items and perfecting your build. Trust me, you'll get through a loop in 10-15 minutes and the difference will be astronomical. But for this explanation, we're not going to loop just because I don't want the video to get too long. How long is it? Oh my god. Alright, let's just go straight to the final stage. But before we do that, the nude altars can be found here, here, and here. Finally, we find ourselves at the moon, that big stupid rock in the sky that thinks it's better than us because it doesn't have trees. Once you arrive here, you'll find yourself deep into the ground, and once you leave, even deeper into the ground because all the enemies are going to kill you. This stage is miles harder than anything on Petrichor. These balls, stay away. These artillery, strafe. These fighter jets, strafe even more. I don't know if it's just from mostly playing on console where I've heard balancing here just gets thrown out the window, but I always try and prepare a pillar skip before coming here. Normally when you get to the moon, you have to activate 4 wacky pillars that can drain your blood, push you away, or spawn enemies. However, finishing these pillars will just activate the elevator on the way up. With a pillar skip, you can just go straight up. Outside of a few items that guarantee it, some survivors have it built into their kit due to just great mobility or blowing yourself up, and then other times you just need the right item combo like a volcanic egg and some fuel cells. There's also cauldrons that let you exchange multiple items for one of a higher rarity. Risky, but sometimes you have a red that you just can't deny, and at this point in your run, you probably have multiple copies of all your items anyway. Also, there's a cluster of lunapods at the opposite end in case you need to pick up a shaped class or a transcendence before the boss fight. However way you decide to get to the last fight, either by using a vase, draining yourself at the pillars of blood, or gorging yourself on lunas, you finally made it to Mitrix. The Mitrix boss fight comes in 4 phases. Round 1, Rumble fighting him one-on-one. His movements are snappy and hit like a truck, so just look out for what seems to be a wind-up and you should be good. Also, you can dodge this ring attack with a simple jump or just getting behind these rocks. Stage 2, Parlay. He summons a host of the stage's enemies to fight you. Somehow these always seem to be easier than the ones down there, but that's probably due to the exploitable cover and exploit you should after these salty seafarers are dealt with. We're on to round 3, the Tango. Mitrix is even more fired up now. Some of his attacks have been amplified with voids of death, and he has the turntable of go yourself and die as a special move too, which you should definitely dodge. I don't know if this should be a tip or not since it seems pretty obvious, but when he starts the cha-cha slide, don't get closer, get further away. His ability covers a less percentage of ground if there's more ground. Mitrix will also spawn other enemies during this round, which is, you know, cute. So you can use them to trigger any on-kill effects that may have been dormant for most of this fight. Lastly, onto the final round, and frankly probably the easiest, the Iron Man. Mitrix takes all of your items, since if you're nothing without the items, then you shouldn't have them. Oh yeah? Well, I'll just Thanos snap you. All it takes is one Royal Conductor to put Mitrix in his place. He moves around pretty slow and his attacks are pretty easy to read, so not really much to say here. After defeating Mitrix, the moon will start to self-destruct. Somehow, you need to take one of these portals and go to the ship to get out of here. Oh yeah, one more teleporter event, baby, with some void enemies to spice it up. Watch out for any black hole attacks since they literally delete anything in the radius and locks them up at the end of time. Finally make it off the moon, then yay, you beat the game, and if you did it on Monsoon, you get a skin. Yippee! So now that you finally did it, you can say you've beaten the game and unlocked the captain, one of my top 3 favorite survivors in the entire game because he has a shotgun. And hey, at the end of the day, beating it was pretty easy, but easy isn't how we do things. We're about perfection. We want to cut every loose hair that this game can wave in our faces as a tease to say, oh, but you never beat that one, did you? Guess you're just not good enough. This mindset plagues Souls players who beat the game with no weapons, no hits, Tesla robots, sodomy run, but it also plagues me too. There's still a few more areas that I haven't been able to work in, so let's just get those out of the way. A Moment Fractured is where you're transported to after entering a celestial portal from stage 7 onward. There's nothing really here except for some rocks and an obelisk that you can definitely touch and nothing will happen afterwards. Haha, got you. It actually just evaporates you, you know, immediately. This also gives you 5 Luna coins, which is nice to get paid for not fighting Mitrix. If you get the Beads of Fealty, however, you are not obliterated and are instead sent to fight the Twisted Scavenger and get 10 Luna coins instead. The Void Fields is a prison that can be accessed via a portal below the Bazaar Between Time. Here, you will face 9 waves of enemies that will introduce a new enemy and an item alternating each round. Every round you are given a new item of increasing rarity, and if you pass all 9 waves, you get to leave with your items. Taking Void Fields can be risky since you need something that can negate the Void Fog damage. Without any repulsion armor plates, you're just going to want to hope that you're fast enough and can heal fast enough too. Just because there's no enemy doesn't mean that the timer ain't going, so if you're standing there healing with no passive regen buffs, you're going to be screwed. Also yes, the enemies can have items, of which they'll get 5, so just hope it's not a crowbar. The earlier you get here, the easier the enemies will generate, so if you plan to go here, do it as quickly as possible. Also, you unlock a new survivor from doing it, the Hound of Plague. Finally, and if I'm to be frank, most importantly, is the Bulwark Ambry. Remember the terminal on stage 5? You can input codes that are hidden around the game to be sent here with a random modifier depending on the code that you put in. Once you get in, you'll find these artifact keys that can be used on the center artifact to progress. After doing it 5 times, you can take the artifact home and the modifier will be an option for your future runs. These modifiers also don't disable achievements, so if there's an unlock you don't want to have to deal with RNG to get, then make life easier and get yourself a few of these. Note as well that going to the Ambry will cause you to loop back to stage 1, so if you're planning to go to Mitrix this loop, then don't go here. So why don't we go through each of these so you know how to spice up your next run with your friends. Artifact of Chaos enables friendly fire that goes for you, your drones, pretty much anything that appears on the left of your screen, and keep in mind the half of the AoE effects you have in your kit, and don't worry about your allies. Artifact of Command lets you pick your items instead of having one randomly generated each time it drops. This is really great for when you want to go for a specific challenge since you can get all the S tier items for your survivor, making you into a powerhouse almost instantly and snowballing onwards from there. Artifact of Death causes every player to die if just one player dies. This is actually more fun than it sounds since me and my friends would just scavenge for any form of revive as our top priority each stage rather than just getting frustrated at dying. Artifact of Delusion resets all chests after a teleporter event, and if you return to the chest you're prompted to Remember, which will display multiple items. If you pick the item that you got from this chest, then it will give you another copy, but if you get it wrong it takes the item away. This is a cute and fun mechanic that I think is worth messing around with since I know some people who play with this enabled more often than not. Artifact of Devotion is one of my favorites as it replaces all the drones with Lemurian eggs. If you offer them an item, they'll become your ally and gain that item. You have no limit to your Lemurians and they all share the same items, so once you have a good few, they can actually get pretty insane. On top of that, they level up to Elite Elder and Elite Elder Lemurians each time you survive a teleporter event. This goes really well with Artifact of Delusion, seeing as you'll be getting extra items from remembering anyway. This artifact pretty much lets you turn any survivor into a summoner class, and I love summoner classes. Artifact of Dissonance allows any monster to spawn on any stage stage regardless of any previous restrictions. I usually just throw this one in if I'm doing a silly run anyway, just to vary things up a bit. The artifact of Enigma has you spawn with a random equipment, and every time you use it, it changes to a different one. This one with a few Bottled Chaos or Jesters of the Drowned is some of the most fun I've had in this game. If you've played Wild Magic and Baldur's Gate or D&D, then you have a fair idea of what to expect. Artifact of Evolution has enemies gain a new item every level that carries over between stages. The order of rarity they receive goes white, white, green, green, and then red, and then it repeats every loop too. I don't play with this one often, but it can definitely add a lot more chaos to your run until they get a crowbar and kill you in one shot. Artifact of Fragility doubles fall damage and makes it lethal. Personally not a fan of adding Eclipse modifiers to my Monsoon runs. Artifact of Glass reduces your health to 10% permanently, but increases your damage to 500%, so it's perfect for speedruns specifically. Artifact of Honor spawns all enemies as elites, have fun in the early game. Artifact of Kin makes it so that all your enemies will be the same enemy, including your teleporter boss fight. Artifact of Metamorphosis has you change survivor every time you spawn, which is another great one to add with your friends and take some of the pressure off build management, since next stage the way you use those items will change. Artifact of Sacrifice makes it so that enemies have a chance to drop an item instead of chest spawning. This one pretty much cuts out looting, which is half the gameplay loop of this game. And also it's where most of your gold goes, so you'll just find yourself with a lot more gold than usual. Artifact of Soul has Wisp spawn every time an enemy dies, which is annoying at first, but it can be exploited to pretty much double the effectiveness of your on-death items. Artifact of Spite has enemies drop bombs upon their death, pretty self-explanatory. Artifact of Swarm halves the health of all your enemies, but two always spawn instead, making AoE more viable and single target damage a little bit less. Artifact of Vengeance has a clone of you spawn every 10 minutes to hunt you down. They inherit all of your items and can be pretty scary, but adds a lot of tension to your run. The one thing I gravitate towards pretty much as soon as I got the game was unlocking every survivor, since that's where most of your flavor and your variety comes from. So in the next section of this video I will go over every survivor, their abilities, how to unlock them, along with any techs or tips I can toss in there too. Okay, so when you get to the end of this video you will hear me absolutely delighted that I finished the script, though I now have to add these parts in because I just forgot to find a section for them or write them all together. Starting with proc coefficients. I make so many references to proc coefficients in this video and I forgot to write about them completely. Every hit in the game has an attached proc coefficient value. Pretty much any time you pick up an item and it has a chance to activate something on hit, like Tri-Tips increasing bleed by 15%. You get this 15% and multiply it by your proc coefficient. So for example, Commando's primary has a proc coefficient of 1, so 1 multiplied by 15 is 15, so you get a 15% chance. Pretty simple, however not every survivor has a proc coefficient of 1. Bandit's Burst has a proc coefficient of 0.5, which pretty much halves all of your on-hit effect chances of triggering. And then proc chains are just the longer version of it. Like long multiplication, you just have to multiply twice. Let's go back to the Commando example and throw in an ATG there with a 10% to proc on hit. That goes untouched. However, let's add an item like Ukulele in there too. Ukulele has a 25% chance to spread damage to a nearby enemy with a proc coefficient of 0.2. So let's assume you hit a primary and your ATG fires a rocket. It hits an enemy. On hit, the ATG's proc coefficient will affect the chance of the uke proccing. 0.1 multiplied by 25, so that's 2.5% chance every time an ATG hits. However, for the inverse, a uke will have its proc coefficient affect the ATG, with a proc coefficient of 0.2 and a 10% chance, that's 0.5% chance. Now, this may appear very low, however each item you have has a chance of starting these chains, so adding a new on-hit item not only increases how far a chain can go, but also the many different ways it can start. This can go as many times as items you have on-hit procs, so you can go ATG into uke, into charge perforator, and so on. Each section in the chain getting less likely, however while the chance of the hit tanks, the damage ramps up. In Risk of Rain 2, you may notice the terms base damage and total damage. Base damage refers to your character's damage stat. Commando, for example, has a base damage of 12, so your Tri-Tips that deal 20% base damage on each tick will be affected by your base damage stat. So 12 multiplied by 0.2 is 2.4. Your base damage increases with levels and is unaffected by which ability you're using. Total damage, on the other hand, is based off of items instead, and are much scarier, usually acting as the formula to calculate a hit's damage. For example, let's go back to the ATG scenario. On a hit, your primary does 100% base damage, so that's 12 at level 1. If ATG is procced off of this, its 300% is multiplied by the primary fire's 12, making it 36 damage. You can also apply this very easily to something like Phase Round, which does 300% base damage, so 300% of 12 is 36, and 300% of 36 is 108. This can also affect proc chains, so continuing that chain, let's say we proc Ukulele as well. Well, the Ukulele does 80% of 108, which is 86.4. There are items that add to your total damage. These are not always taken into account when making an attack. Crowbar, for example, will deal an additional 70% 75% damage to any enemies above 90% health, changing your primary fire from 100% to 175% as long as it's the first hit. However, if an ATG is procced off of this hit, it will only use the base 100% damage from the attack, not taking the condition of being above 90% HP into account, unless they actually are, in which case the bonus is applied to the final damage. These items that increase your base damage also work better when you have multiple unique items instead of multiple stacks. You can probably guess by now, but stacking an item is additive while getting more items is multiplicative if they interact right. Even Focus Crystal can multiply your armor piercing rounds to deal tremendous damage to the boss. I'll admit that I only ever watched a few videos explaining proc coefficients and just kept the general guideline in my head. This section may appear very similar to other videos on the topic, and that's because it is. I learned these concepts from these channels, and it's hard to add variety to the way I explain maths when I'm not very good at maths to begin with. If you really wanted to, you could start making spreadsheets for this stuff and you'd probably see a lot of value out of it. However, what I've just mentioned is usually what I keep in my head during my runs because I can't hold too much information up there. I'm really stupid. I somehow remember the invisible chests, of which I've only ever gotten 2. Adaptive chests will cycle through random red, green, and white items, getting increasingly faster. For me at least, it's too hard to actually process what's right in front of me, so I have like a set list of whites and greens in my head, and if I see red, I insta-click. Honestly, once you get used to it, you can easily rig these. Outside of every so often misclick, I tend to get these items that are very beneficial to most of my runs. Outside of the DLC cycle of the game, Gearbox released an update when they acquired Risk of Rain. This update added the artifacts of Delusion and Devotion, which makes me excited for the future of artifacts. Alongside that, we got a new map, Verdant Falls, which I think is really pretty, and honestly I think Stage 1 maps should have the most variety, if not evenly split. Though it made it absolute hell when I had to restart runs for like 15 minutes straight until I got shadowed abode for footage. This update also added a skin for Mercenary, turning him into the protagonist from Dead Cells, another game I would probably do one of these videos on after it consumed my life for weeks on end. One thing I brushed on previously, but I should probably reiterate, is the Wikipedia for this game. Now, the fandom wiki is really good, so good in fact that I've been using their visuals for my visuals because they're just amazing. However, I will say the Wikipedia has a history of having things slightly wrong, or just wrong altogether. It happens in a game like this where people just have to go out and experiment their own stuff. Some percentages get mixed up a small bit. Just if you do use it as an example, don't take the numbers as hard as they're written. Later in the video as well, for the Seekers of the Storm stuff, some of the stuff hasn't been filled in yet, and I'm recording this like several weeks after it's been released, so oh well. One last thing that isn't really important, but I feel like I should mention anyway. You may have noticed the gameplay is really bad. Like, you know, not like in terms of quality, it's just I'm really bad at the game. Most of the time I'm playing on Rainstorm and I have Sacrifice and Command enabled. When I record my footage, it is in the morning after I get out of bed, the first thing I do, after my cup of coffee of course. And then I throw on my headphones to listen to something. This just puts me into a zen state where I'm actually like just not locked in at all while I'm playing the game. So you'll very often see me make this absolute silliest of mistakes. And you should laugh at them. You should take these as example of what not to do. Please, watch the gameplay and just point and laugh. It is actually amazing. I've been doing it the whole time while editing. Alright, after this, the next voice you hear is from like 3 weeks ago. Risk of Rain 2 sums up Commando as a jack of all trades that's suitable for any situation, which is utter bullshit. Look, I think playing Commando is actually pretty fun. You feel cool going around the map with nothing but your twin pistols and a survival instinct. But survival instinct doesn't save you from magma worms. Commando is one of the 2 survivors unlocked by default in the base game, and probably the one you played first. His primary is a rapid repeating pistol shot that's great when combined with on-hit items like tri-tips and ATGs. His damage overall is pretty subpar, so you're going to want to grab some items that complement his strength, like consistent movement and high fire rate. His secondary is a power blast that gets stronger each time it hits an enemy. I usually just throw this out whenever the cooldown's up rather than taking my time to line up shots. Your alternate secondary option is a double shotgun blast that, if you're like me and just throw out your secondary whenever it's off cooldown, you should probably take this one. And if you do prefer to line up your shots, I don't really know what to say. I've never met anyone who prefers that one. His movement ability Tactical Dive lets you relive your dreams of being a Hollywood star, while the alternative Tactical Slide does the same but covers more distance, unless it's in the air. I'm honestly not sure why you wouldn't take the slide over the roll, but some people just have their preference. His special fires a volley of rounds that stuns enemies. Getting attack speed buffs won't make it shorter, but it will fit more amount of shots into the attack, which can get pretty funny when you start syringe maxing. The alternative, Frag Grenade, is useless and shouldn't be considered unless buffed. The damage is is shockingly poor, and you have to get used to aiming the yokes, which isn't worth the effort. Commando's biggest drawback is that he's missing those big bursts of damage necessary to easily clear a teleporter boss, without anything strong enough that could even proc ban. You'll want to prioritize on-hit items, since while you're not hitting hard, you're definitely hitting a lot, and attack speed buffs only increase the rate of your on-hit effects. You don't need movement items as much as some, since your ability can be used pretty tactically to avoid larger increments of damage. Also, your secondary and special will reset the spread on your primary. Huntress will probably be your second survivor, considering that she's the second one that you unlock. Her passive makes it really hard to miss enemies, meaning that you never don't hit, so what's the special word again? On-hit effects! But Huntress also has some abilities with some pretty high burst damage, meaning crowbars and bands are also a pretty nutty pick if I do say so myself. Her primary fires a pretty strong shot, marginally slower than Commando's primary, but marginally more damage too, so you can get clear of those pesky wisps in swift strikes. The alternative has you fire 3 shots at once, instead doing the same amount of damage as 2 hits with your default, but attack speed is increased from 0.5 to 1.3. There's a lot of variables to balance here, especially considering on crits the alternative will fire 6 shots instead. You may be considering the overall DPS with these, but also consider proc items like tri-tips on every hit for a critted alt primary shot. However, if you're considering the alternative, you'll also want to consider that its proc coefficient is 0.7 instead of the default's 1. So which one should you use? I actually have no idea. Every time I use one of these, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, no matter which one I pick, so just pick whichever one feels right. Onto your secondary, we got Glaive, one of the most satisfying abilities in the game. Deals high enough damage for me to waste on a single target, but as long as you have multiple enemies for it to bounce off of, you'll deal 2,372% damage, split amongst however many enemies. If you can isolate 2 stronger enemies, then it'll bounce back and forth between the 2. And if you find a herd of 12 Lemurians, then you know what that means.
Mountain. Boomerang! Watch out for when it... Ugh.
2 boomerangs!
If you get this to the last 2 hits, then it lets you proc bans, which is essential for dealing with stronger enemies, and if you get a crowbar in there, it'll be no problem to wipe out hordes and bosses. Huntress's 2 movement skills let her blink a short distance 3 times or a long distance once. I personally prefer to have 3 just to have more uses in smaller bursts, but you're limited to horizontal blinks instead of vertical ones too, so take your pick. Her specials let you pick between a rain of arrows that slows your opponents or the big gun. I believe you might want to pick the big gun. The rain of arrows can help you slow down a group of enemies, but that does very little to actually damage them. Your ballista, however, helps you decimate tanky enemies all the way from early to late game, not to mention being a more reliable bands proc than having to get at least 4 hits on your glaive. Do yourself a favor, take the big gun. Huntress overall does exactly what she says on the tin. She has high mobility and damage opportunities, but you don't want to get caught or cornered. Huntress is one of my most neglected survivors, probably because of the disappointing special default. However, while recording for this video, I've actually been having a lot of fun with her, so you should definitely give her a go if you haven't already. Bandit is your local gunslinger, and probably one of the first survivors you unlock, other than the next guy on the list, and the character who makes you realize just how different every survivor is, and the game makers know that. That's why they give you free crits on every backshot. I know what I said. This, along with a nifty movement ability that turns you invisible and a revolver, you're going to have a completely different playstyle than your first 2 stock survivors. Now worrying about how you can disappear and deal large chunks of damage before vanishing again. Your primary fires 5 shots in a horizontal line with a pretty tight spread. However, if you land all 4 hits, that's 2,000 damage as fast as you can fire it before taking 1.2 seconds to reload all 4 shots, making a pretty reliable means of deleting enemies once you know exactly how many shots it'll take. Also, not to mention, this damage isn't taking into account your free backshots, and no, I won't stop saying it. Now, considering all of this, and look at the alternate primary. What the fuck? Dealing almost half of what you otherwise would have for this? I don't think I need to continue. This interview is over. His secondary is a stab that inflicts hemorrhaging and a throwing knife that inflicts hemorrhaging. The damage on the latter is slightly lower, but it isn't restricted to pissing distance, so make your choice. Your movement ability, Smoke Bomb, has you vanish in a blast, and then after the duration ends, or you use an ability, you blast again to reappear. Going invisible for a few seconds gives you a lot of breathing room that other survivors see as a luxury. Is a fight not going your way, then you can just turn invisible and run away altogether. It's not like they can catch up with you half the time anyway. This ability is also just great for getting around a map since it gives you a small movement buff. Your specials let you choose between 2 prized revolvers, Lights Out and Desperado. Lights Out is your default and has 2 nice effects to it. One is it deals more damage the more damaged the target is, dealing an extra 2% per 1% missing. It also resets all your skill cooldowns on a kill, so the idea is pretty clear. You use your primary to damage targets until they're in Lights Out range, so you can get a kill, reset your mag, and reset your Lights Out. However, this is a lot of calculating to do on your 7th Lemurian million in a row. So much so that I wish there was an in-game hint that light outs can one-shot or like show a portion of damage it'll do to their health bar. If it had that, then I'd love it simply for the design headache. However, counterpoint, Desperado. Desperado increases in damage by 10% every kill. It's actually 60% because total damage and base damage are different. The buff stacks until you teleport to the next stage or die, even if you get revived somehow. So your game plan is to progressively one-shot more and more enemies as consistently as possible until you have a pocket WMD by the time the teleporter boss rolls around. Now, again, both of these are designed beautifully, but like Desperados. Multi, the big man himself. I hear you like your survivors modular and customizable. Multi comes with the most primary options out of any hero, seeing as he can swap between 2 or dual wield. Your higher base health and armor also makes you into a literal tank once you start stacking health items. Nail Gun, one of my favorite abilities in the game just because it enables some pretty insane bleed builds if you get a Shadow Spleen too. Did I mention I love Shadow Spleen? Buy one today, I can't stop buying Shadow Spleens. Rapid Spray is fun because anything you do to it is funny. More attack speed, I giggle. More rockets, I giggle. Life Flux Pauldron. The other weapon you have as a default option is the Rebar Puncher, which just projectile fires a metal pipe at the enemy, which gives me such a visceral reaction every time I hit flesh enemies. 10 out of 10 ability. This thing just deletes anything from afar. I wish I could see the enemy's POV while I slowly line up my shot before they blink and then BOOM! Lobotomy. Scrap Launcher turns you into a tank with a 4-shot rocket that reloads after 2 seconds of not firing. This one isn't as funny as the other two, but I still take it from time to time if I just want to blow chunks off of beetles because screw beetles. Power Saw is just terrifying. What can I really say about this one? It has a pull factor that brings you closer to the enemy slightly, so you're like a Jack Russell Terrier as soon as he gets a hold of your leg. Your secondary fires a grenade with smaller cluster grenades and nice for weaving in with your primary fire, but otherwise not too noteworthy. Your movement skill has you hunker down and this lasts for a few seconds and should mostly be used for repositioning in a fight quickly or just getting around the map. The damage is helpful if you want to get through enemies too, since you can get additional armor from activating the ability. Your default specials allow you to swap between 2 primaries and 2 equipment slots. This is great for adding some flexibility to your run. Taking both a nail gun and a rebar puncher covers a lot of ground in terms of enemies, and having a utility equipment and a damage equipment boosts your effectiveness greatly. Most players use 2 rebar punches to maximize their damage output, since the swap speed is faster than its attack speed, but whenever I try this, it just feels really clunky compared to dual-wielding saws or nail guns. Yes, like I said, there's a reason I haven't beaten Eclipse 8. Your alternate special replaces your secondary with your other primary and gives you armor at the cost of speed. Need I say more? Dual-wielding any of these weapons just becomes a laugh fest. I need to do a 4-player game where we all dual-wield different weapons. I love playing multi, even if I'm bad at him, though that's probably because I refuse to do anything other than a bleed build with him with nail guns. Engineer gets your items and multiplies them by 3 by giving them to your 2 deployable turrets as well. All of Engineer's skills give you a very hands-off approach to dealing with your enemies, except for the primary, that launches a charged volley of grenades for some reasonable damage. Honestly, this ability isn't too great even for just drawing aggro, but I don't think it's meant to be more impactful, seeing as the brunt of your damage will come from your turrets. Your secondary mines let you pick between timed mines or spider mines that seek out your opponents. 90% of the time, spider mines are just more effective since they go out and actually seek your opponents. While timed mines jump up, it does take a bit more time to set up that isn't possible mid-battle without just sacrificing a bunch of damage. Speaking of an option that's useless and one that seeks out its enemies, we got Bubble Shield and Thermal Harpoons. The bubble makes a spherical barrier that doesn't let any bullets in, while the Thermal Harpoons seek out enemies and blow them up. The choice here is pretty clear again. Yeah, you might get some use out of Bubble by being able to just stand there in one spot and hold them off, but once the bubble's gone, you just have a cluster of enemies around you for 15 seconds, or you could have just been strafing and drawing aggro while using your harpoons to add to your overall DPS. The shield isn't without its use, it just sucks that it's not very useful at all to begin with. Okay, well, at least the special options might be something. See, we got the stationary turrets that fire rounds and a mobile turret that fires lasers. Without getting into too much, just take the stationary ones. The AI on the mobile one is wonky and they barely move properly, meaning you'll probably have to redeploy them fairly often anyway. A lot of Engineer's gameplay consists of dodging enemies and managing your resources, allocating your harpoons correctly and maximizing the uptime on your turrets. And while you do all of this, you're running away from the enemies, so get some good speed early and you'll notice a massive difference. Your 2 turrets together will fire about as fast as Commando's primary, so proc items are also a big goal here. That, with some minor crowd control, means you'll be able to lock down any teleporter event effortlessly. Probably. Every time I find an item as Engineer, I look at it way more differently than I would with any other survivor, which is really refreshing and can get pretty relaxing if you just wanted to chill too. Artificer can be found in the bazaar between time and bought for 10 Lunar coins. A lot of people use the term ability cycle for this hero, since you generally have an order you use your abilities to maximize uptime while they regenerate regenerate. Her jetpack allows you to slow her fall in case you want to take enemies from the skies or just to break a fall. Her ability options let you switch up their elements, like the primary for example can go from big burn with overtime damage or big shock with more AoE. Personally I take the fire option just because of the extra DPS. Onto a secondary you can either toss out a demon core or chuck an ice spear that freezes your target. The nano bomb is great since it deals more damage at full charge and has a respectable AoE, but your nano spear freezes enemies which allows you to execute them, and even works on the final boss, Mithrix. However, your third ability, Ice Wall, also freezes enemies, so really it's up to you. Your final option is between the Flamethrower and the Ion Surge. Flamethrower is one of the most controversial picks within the entire community. Personally, I think it's alright. Needs a few items to be helpful, but can add some extra DPS if you feel you need the extra bit with the rest of your kit. However, Ion Surge will be your only real movement option on this survivor, and adds a lot for someone who otherwise wouldn't have any at all. This covers movement when looting and in combat, which are probably Artifice's biggest weakness, so do yourself a favor and just take the Ion Surge. Very rarely do I actually play Artificers. No issues really, just can feel a bit slow in the early game, and I don't get that same oomph from her abilities that I normally would have. Mercenary is an aura farming god who underperforms on purpose because if you killed everything too fast it wouldn't look nearly as cool. Well, not unless you have the items for it. His passive lets him double jump naturally, which makes the early game feel a lot less sluggish as well. Mercenary's abilities mostly allow him to appear and reappear mid-combat thanks to a lot of movement abilities that deal some pretty reasonable burst damage with a lot of AoE potential, which is insane considering it's just a dude with a sword. Also, Mercenary is probably the single hardest character to reach their skill ceiling. He has so many intricate techs that require you to lock in a lot, like mastering the third hit on your primary. Every third hit applies Exposed, which if you cancel the animation by using another ability after your second swing, the attack will still carry the Exposed property, so essentially you can use this with your default movement ability to apply Exposed on a large group of enemies to replenish your special and repeat 2 more times, or combine it with the alternate movement ability to apply Exposed twice on each enemy instead of having multiple charges. But either way, you're going to be zipping around enemies that will be mauling since they can't get their hands on you. However, I should say that increasing your attack speed can make the timing for this much harder, so opt for other items if you have the chance. Your secondary options are either a Rising Uppercut or a Double Strike. Not much difference between the two, you're mostly just going to be weaving these in with your other abilities to maximize your DPS. Your special default is a Perception Stealth on a targeted enemy, much like Commando's default special. Increasing the attack speed will just shove more attacks into the animation, which is why I always lose on Mercenary since stacking like 7 syringes just makes this move absolutely hilarious. The alternative is a ranged attack that hits 3 enemies, the third hit applies Exposed, which means even more cooldown reductions. Combining your third hit primary with the Exposed dash and disability pretty much guarantees 0 cooldowns during boss events at the very least. Like I said, Mercenary is still one of the hardest survivors to learn considering the smallest slip up means the end of your run. Perfect for when I want to lock in and sweat, which is what he was made for. Rex is one of the stranger survivors in Risk of Rain 2, being a symbiotic pair between a robot and a plant, one who wants to live and another who wants to die. All of Rex's abilities either damage them, heal them, or both. Your alternative abilities deal self-damage and heal, while the defaults are marginally weaker, but don't self-damage. His primary fires 3 syringes that weaken and heal for 60% of the damage dealt, giving you some pretty easy inbuilt healing so that if you don't find any heals stage 1, then you're not entirely screwed. Your default secondary Rain Seeds for 450 damage, or Seed Barrage, which deals 15% self-damage and deals a burst of 450% damage instead. Also, cooldown for this one is literally half a second. I prefer to take the burst, it's more readily available, clears small groups of enemies, and if you keep an eye on their health bar, then you'll rarely get caught with your pants down. Meanwhile, the raining bullets just feel much less impactful, and that 6-second cooldown is heavy compared to half a second. Your utilities are a non-lethal Shotgun Blast and a lethal Shotgun Blast for both of you. Your non-lethal option is great for giving you space and getting a little boost. The alternative deals 20% damage to you, but heals 10% per enemy hit, deals 550% damage, and has a cooldown that's 5 seconds shorter at half a second. The alternative one is only worse at traversal since you probably won't be hitting loads of enemies while traversing, but you definitely could. Your specials are pretty much made for healing you large amounts. Tangling siphons health from a group of enemies while they're tangled, and Harvest injects a fruit into your opponent which they drop on death. So many questions. Harvest is like an inbuilt monster tooth that's slightly more effective if you remember to use it. On the other hand, I really like Tangling. It's fun seeing a group of enemies come to kill you and then just deciding, haha, actually you will become my health, and then just walking away like you just turned them into batteries. I always love characters who use their HP bar as a resource where it doesn't really matter what it's at, but what you can do to it. That, on top of some pretty nutty damage early game and late game, we're looking at a pretty strong hero in Eclipse 4 or below. These guys can go fucked themselves in Eclipse 8. Oh my god. Loader is the Speed Freak's wet dream, starting with a grappling hook on default, and yes, backup mags adds extra charges to this for monkey levels of traversal. Whoa, hey, you're getting pretty high there, don't want to break your... That's right, no fall damage, because the alternative was too hard to deal with. Additionally, being on the slower end of melee survivors, she gets 5% barrier per hit with her primary. Now, most of your damage isn't going to come from slapping Lemurians over the head, but by shooting like a human rocket through entire fleets of void creatures with your charged gauntlet or spiked fist, both of which do more damage the faster you go. I always take Spiked Fist just because charging the fist can be bothersome. However, I will admit that every time I use Charged Fists, I am taking them back slightly. The alternative to grappling hooks lets you grapple enemies, bringing you closer to larger ones and bringing smaller ones closer to you. I've been using this in conjunction with our other alternatives recently, and it is very fun. I highly recommend. Your specials, along with your grapple options, mostly ask you to pick between damage and movement again, with the Pylon or the Thunder Slam. While the Pylon does deal damage, it also can be grappled, so most people tend to use it for traversal. If you throw it out right before grappling, then you're pretty much guaranteed to connect, so it's great for leaving a fight too if there's no high ground to grapple to. Naturally, Thunder Slam is just better suited for the Spiked Fist. Being able to get close to an enemy before decimating him has its appeal that I can't deny. Grabbing a few backup mags and some burst damage items and you'll be flying through stages, literally. I've played Loader in the past 3 weeks researching for this video more than I have ever, and I'm actually starting to see the appeal as she's slowly becoming one of my favourite survivors. Speaking of survivors that the community loves, we have Acrid, the Acid Doggo himself. Returning from Risk of Rain 1 as the only named survivor, we have Acrid, who specializes in hit and run tactics and spreading the plague. Most of your gameplay will see you jumping into a horde of enemies, poisoning them, and then getting out of there. Your poison does damage based off the target's max HP, unless 100% base damage actually does more. The game lets you pick an alternative passive, and trust me, I am a Blight Glazer. Yes, I find the idea of doing raw damage more appealing than percentage-based damage, since you can stack it and technically reach greater heights. However, the big caveat is that unlike Bleed, the stacks don't reset on reapplication, so you'll very rarely get more than a few stacks before it runs out. Trust me, take poison. You'll feel like you're doing less damage, but the game will be much more forgiving. Honestly, if Blight was a lot more like Bleed, then that's all I'd need, but sadly, it isn't like Bleed, and I'm hoping that it does get buffed soon because of how drastically different it is from Poison. I feel like most people idolize Blight more because it's different than because it's good. Because it's not good. Okay, on to the primary, which you'll very rarely use past stage 3. There's a nice animation cancel you can do on the first hit, but honestly just stick with the rest of your kit to do more damage over time rather than taking the hands-on approach. For secondaries, we have the ranged option and the melee option. Considering what I just said, it's far more effective to do a little spit on a random enemy or boss than it is to try and close the distance and then try and get out with more health than you had before. I like the bite's effect of dealing more damage the more health is missing, but it's limited to 3 times the damage, so it can be underwhelming. However, with a 2-second cooldown on the boss, please refer back to the Terrier analogy. You have 2 leap options that either deal damage or reduce their own cooldown. One thing I've noticed from using Frenzied Leap is that in the early game I really noticed the lack of cooldown reductions and loss in damage. However, in the late game, it's much easier to get multiple refreshes on the ability given the absolute volume of enemies. So just cover what you feel like your weaker areas are and you should do good. Epidemic is the bread and butter of your class. Hi, Bowtime. Seeing as it's your main way of applying mass poison. After an enemy is hit by Epidemic, they spread it to up to 2 more enemies. This repeats 20 times, so whatever, like 2 to the power of 20 is how many enemies you can get with this, which is like a million? This does damage on hit too, so even if a group of enemies are on 1, then it'll wipe them all out. You can also fire this on a surface near an enemy to have it spread in case you're worried it might fly past their shoulder. However, keep in mind that if you do this, the total number of enemies infected will be 2 to the power of 19, and not 2 to the power of 20. So please consider what you're missing out with this tech. The last survivor on the list, we got the Captain, my favourite survivor in the base game, and the one you get from being Mitrix. The old Captain isn't alone, however, seeing as he has his trusty shotgun prosthetic and the UES safe travels at his back, dropping supplies and shells onto his enemies. Your passive gives you a defensive drone that fires down projectiles. The rate it does it at can increase, but it doesn't exceed more than the amount you have per second, and seeing as you can't buy or find microbots, you'll be limited to 1 free projectile a second, unless you find some way to break the game. Captain has 0 movement abilities. His shotgun barely has any blowback, so this will save you in a pinch where a few movement items won't. These are also granted to your other drones, which can add to their own survivability, and yours, seeing as if they're nearby and you're shot at, they might might stop the hit. Seeing as you're more like a walking fortress with this survivor than any other, you do want to invest in a few good drones to up your survivability, especially on the later stages where more varied drones appear. Your primary is probably one of the best primaries in the entire game. It fires 8 pellets and can be charged to tighten the spread for more accurate shots. Attack speed buffs increase both the attack speed and the charge speed. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful ability. It does absolutely everything you'd expect it to and has one effect that I really like too. When calculating crits, the game calculates it for the entire shot and not each individual pellet. So when it is a crit, they all crit, which is just really satisfying, especially with on-crit items like Predatory Instincts and Shatterspleen, my beloved. Your underwhelming secondary only serves to make your primary better, seeing as I just weave it in with my shots to maximize my attack speed, which makes backup mags really helpful too. Like I said, this ability is not good, but it does cancel the cooldown on your primary fire, so it can actually increase your fire rate if you use it effectively. Orbital probes can be called down to rain hellfire on your opponents. After activating it, you go into a targeting state that can be cancelled with a sprint. Pick your targets and after a few seconds, the probes will drop, dealing 1000 damage per hit. What more do I need to say? It's just raw damage. Your alternative for this, instead, is a nuke, with a 40-second cooldown and does friendly damage. Now, the friendly damage is technically reduced to 20,000% instead of 40,000%. I very, very rarely use this just because it's on a 40-second cooldown and it's only ever used to kill bosses or skip the pillars. The 3 regular strikes can just be thrown out so much more often and can consistently deal with mid to high end enemies. Maybe I should just get a regular 4-man lobby together with a 40-second cooldown. We could have one every 10 seconds. Your supply beacons let you set up what kind of support you'll need on the floor. The healing one is my personal favourite for getting me out of a pinch, but I'll admit it's a bad habit for me not to use the alternatives too. The shock one is really good for perma-stunning enemies. If you get a big group of enemies stuck in there, the less enemies are going to spawn, especially on teleporter events. The resupply beacon, I'm sure, has some cool interactions, but the only one I can think of is 7 fucking Prion accumulators. Hacking allows you to go up to pretty much any gold bot interactable and have it for free. This is better used on multi-shop terminals or areas where the beacon can hit multiple spots to maximize its effectiveness. For me, Captain was like a hyperfixation in itself. I think I played him for like a week straight, non-stop, and he was the first survivor I actually beat Monsoon with. And that is all the content in the base game I would like to cover, so let's move on to Survivors in the Void and Seekers of the Storms expansions. I'll be going through the 2 of these pretty much the same way I did for the base game. In the coming months, we'll be seeing the release of Alloyed Convergence, an update focused on the alloy enemies of the game with an alloyed survivor and possibly Handy coming back. They said it's a returning survivor and it's robot team, so makes sense, though some people are also saying it might be minor since it'll be underground, but whichever one it is, I am hyped. Handy is one of my top survivors in Risk of Rain Returns, so if he comes to Risk of Rain 2, I would be so happy. On March 1st, 2022, Survivors of the Void released, Risk of Rain's first DLC that focuses on the Void faction of enemies and their corrupted items that alter the effects of already existing items, as well as a new mode, 2 new survivors, maps, enemies, and new bosses. We'll start with the new game mode, Simulacrum, a round-based mode where waves of enemies come for you as you're trialed in the Void. Every wave you get a new item, and there's still chests and stuff around the map, but the Voidlings hotbox the place, so you can barely breathe while you're away from your air purifier that floats. Every 5 waves is a boss wave with more powerful enemies, and every 10th wave the enemies get a new item in their pool, going in order of white, white, green, green, red. There's honestly not a lot to say about this mode, but I really appreciate its presence as a good, well, alternative game mode. Dunphy from my Justice League videos loved it more than the default mode.
Geez, something's wrong. I can't breathe.
Shoot him in the fucking head!
The biggest feature of the new update, in my opinion at least, is the new Void Seeds, which has Void-infected enemies and newly added Void enemies invade the map and attack anything in sight that isn't just one of them. Defeating all of the Void enemies will break the Void Seed, allowing you to unlock the cradles to get a item. A lot of Void in this expansion. These Void items infect one of your already existing items, or just gives you the Void version if it's your first one. And it will also infect any future items. For example, Wungus is the corrupted version of Bungus. If I had no Bungus, I would now have 1 Wungus. If I had 3 Bungus, I would now have 4 Wungus, but no Bungus. Any future Bungos become Wungos, and I think I'm having a stroke. A big problem inherent to Risk of Rain's design is adding a new item to an item pool will make every other item in that category slightly weaker by reducing its chances to appear, which is crucial in a game where you want to stack items that complement your build. So these Void items are a really good compromise that lets us pretty much have the best of both worlds. I don't think I've had a single Void item that was a no-brainer. Every time I genuinely stopped, considered my build, and said whether I wanted the standard version or the corrupted version. You can't give corrupted items to Lemurians, there's factors to consider here. Along with that, a lot of the items added to the existing item pools have effects that are similar enough to other items. One of my favorites is Mocha, which gives a 7.5% attack speed buff, and a 7% 10% movement buff, which pretty much halves the effects of 2 existing items and puts them into 1. This is just a small tangent, but I think it's necessary in understanding how good an item is overall for the game rather than just your own moment-to-moment experiences. A few new maps were added to the regular progression of the game as well, and what I say here now is applicable to Seekers too, but these maps are I genuinely don't think there's a new map that I don't love, and they come out with a decent few each update, which adds a lot of variety to the game. While it isn't needed, it's definitely appreciated. A new Stage 1 map called Siphon Forest was added, that still does really well to distinguish itself from Rally Point Delta. The map doesn't feature any new secrets or Easter eggs, but developers said that the trees are drinking chocolate milk at the Earth's core, which may be relevant to Allied Convergence. You'll also come across the new Blind Pests and Blind Vermin, which generally exist to just add to the general chaff of the game, but they are very welcome along with the Gup family of enemies. Aphelion Sanctuary is a new Stage 2 tower-themed map featuring the new tower-themed enemy, the Clay Apothecary, who just makes me giggle every time I see him. A new Stage 3 map is Sulfur Pools, which has a bunch of sulfur pools, shocker, I know, and spore pods that poison you when burst. All the new altars can be found at these locations. The DLC triumphs at its new endgame events, starting at the Void Locust, possibly the most beautiful map in the game. Like, where else can you get this? It can be accessed by either beating the Void Fields and taking the Void Portal. After Stage 7, there's a 10% chance the portal will spawn after a teleporter event, and my personal favourite way, going back to spawn after beating Mitrix and petting his pet frog, 10 times spawning a portal that skips the Void Locust and goes straight to the planetary. Keep in mind, you do have to spend a Luna coin every time you pet the frog, but like, look at him, how can you say no? That last option I do really appreciate just for being able to continue your run a bit longer after beating the final boss. Once you get here, your job is to activate the Void Signals at 4 locations. These events are similar to the Void Fields, where the fog engulfs the area except the teleporter space and Void enemies will spawn to kill you. A consistent theme between Void enemies is their ability to one-shot you with their black hole attacks. Do not get cop IDs, they will send you to prison at the end of time. After you finish all these signals, a Void Portal will appear, which will bring you to the planetarium, where you fight the DLC's final boss. The Voidling is an artillery unit of a boss, with answers to deal with you at almost any range. Luckily, a lot of the attacks are heavily choreographed, so they're relatively easy to dodge as long as you have good positioning. Moving through the Void is another story. I absolutely hate parkour in games that are not parkour games. Not a bad addition, but it does what it's meant to do, which is annoy me. Luckily, if you have even a few good movement items, these parts become trivial, so at least I have that much. On the second phase, enemies will begin to spawn based on what stage the area is mimicking. Honestly, I like the enemies being here. It usually lets me get more mileage out of my items that need enemies to trigger. The Voidling doesn't really gain any new attacks between phases, except for one it gains for phase 2 and 3, where it releases a black hole centered on itself that sucks everything in. This will instantly kill you, keep that in mind. Upon defeating the Voidling, a portal will open prompting you to obliterate yourself, much like the obelisk in A Moment Fractured, but purple instead of blue. While this is a great way to continue your run, it won't count towards any achievements that involve escaping the planet, and also won't unlock Captain or Mercenary if you're going for them. However, doing this for the first time will unlock you the Void Fiend, one of the 2 survivors added in the DLC and one of my 2 favourite survivors in the game alongside the Railgunner. The Railgunner goes all in on single target burst damage with her railgun that can critical hit spots for a guaranteed critical hit, along with a Gears of War style reload mechanic. The reload thing is tricky at first, but after a few stages you'll be firing out shots faster than a British longbowman. Getting that sweet spot also does add an extra 500% damage to your shot. Stacking backups mags lets you do more shots before needing to reload. So with a few ukuleles or gasolines to cover your AoE, you'll be clearing out waves of enemies like Sniper Elite. This also converts any crit chance gained from items into crit damage. So Lensmaker's Glasses actually gives you an additional 15% to your critical hits. However, your default primary while unscoped is a machine gun with disgusting tracking. It even hits enemies behind me. I use these like those smart guns from Cyberpunk and just fire around corners to get cheap kills. While this is your primary attack, I more think of it as an offhand you weave in with your scope shot. There is a slight bit of recoil on this, which will disable your bungus, but can also be used to cushion fall damage. The alternate secondary is more of a marksman rifle, where you do half the amount of damage, but don't need to unscope between shots, which can really up your fire rate. You're still at a loss for damage, but this can make things like tri-tip daggers a small bit more viable with those extra hits. It's funny, because most people try to unlock the alternate secondary because they can't get the hang of the default one, but by the time they unlock the alternative, they've become more efficient with the default. Your utility skill is a concussive mine that can be used to bounce yourself and your enemies around the map. It doesn't do damage, but with some environmental awareness, you can make use of it as a way for getting around the map, or getting somewhere you would otherwise need a double jump for. The alternative is a device that emits a field that slows down enemies and any projectiles that enter it. Keep in mind that making projectiles slower does not always make them easier to dodge, since if there's a high volume, they'll just make a big wall. Also, the lack of mobility is a real kick in the nuts. Your special is a powered shot that does 4,000 damage. Commando's grenade does 700. I'm just saying. This ability for the most part is intended for bosses and annihilating them almost immediately. This, along with some crowbars, is just overkill after a while. You'll realize its use more if you use the marksman rifle, as you'll be using it as an answer to more enemies than if you took the sniper. However, coming in as a competitive contender is Cryocharge, a powered shot that deals only 2,000 damage, but also freezes them, which also allows them to be executed at low health with a follow-up shot. And luckily for you, this doesn't count towards your secondary reload, so you can aim, fire a freezing shot, and then a secondary shot before reloading. Honestly, both of these are great, and viable. You can make great arguments for the two of them. However, the one thing I'll give the Cryocharge, that it can be used to absolutely humiliate Mitrix, but you're not always going to be going for Mitrix, so do as you please. With Railgunner, you're going to mostly be going faster than other survivors, since you don't need as many items to deal with bosses and can ignore a lot of enemies and chip them off from afar. If you want to feel like a badass, load up Railgunner and 360 quickscope your enemies. I don't care if it's 2025, it makes me feel like a gamer. Void Fiend, my favorite creature of this expansion, constantly fighting and shifting between two forms that have a different set of abilities, so because of that, this character has no unlocks. However, you do have access to 8 abilities in your run. Your passive gives you a corruption gauge that increases naturally whenever you gain a critical hit or whenever you take damage. You can increase its lower limit by having void items, each item increasing the minimum by 2%, and yes, this can go up to the max, which just locks you into the corrupted state. The primary in your default state is an infinite range hit scan laser that slows enemies and deals 300% damage per shot. This will usually one-shot flying enemies, especially if you have like one crowbar, and it's great for clearing up hordes, and even with just 1 or 2 attack speed buffs, it is great single target proc damage and raw damage for that matter. Did I forget to mention the fact that it has infinite range? Also, there's like a small bit of course correction with your shot. As long as they're in this radius, it'll just lock onto them anyway. Your secondary is a charge shot that deals 600% damage uncharged and 1100 at full charge. It fires in a straight line and can be used to hit multiple enemies pretty consistently too. Even uncharged, it can be a really reliable Bans proc. Sometimes as well, it's not a bad idea to just alternate between primaries and uncharged secondaries for the animation cancel. After a while of using it, you get used to the idea of when to do it. Your utility makes you corporeal and rise up into the air before reappearing and retaining your momentum, and cleansing any debuffs. Mostly used for traversal, but can be used to dodge larger attacks from bigger enemies or bosses. But other than that, you'll probably find yourself mostly strafing to keep up your DPS. Your special will consume 25% of your meter and restore 25% of your HP, which is very good for those moments when you see your health bar and notice that it's not at max. And luckily, since the gauge fills, even if you've taken damage, you probably have it at least 25%. This is also why getting void items is a good idea, as it makes it more likely to have at least 25. And yes, if you have 13 void items, you will always have a minimum of 26% and can spam free heals. Even with a few attack speed buffs and some Nuka Hunters, you could kill enemies while you heal. But if your meter fills, you transform to the corrupted version, and the gauge begins to fall instead, and when it reaches 0, you revert back to your default state. In your corrupted form, your primary is a giant death laser that kills everything in seconds. Commando's grenade deals 700%. This is 2000%. This is stupid. Technically, it's actually 8 hits a second at 250% per hit, but that's still stupid amounts of damage for a primary fire. The slow effect that you previously applied to the enemies is applied to yourself, however. Your corrupted secondary fires for the max 1100 damage immediately, but is affected by gravity, so you'll have to take that into account while you're aiming. Getting a few backup mags with this is also a recipe to just destroy any boss. Your corrupted utility shifts its trajectory by 90 degrees to aim you forward instead, to tremendous effect, since this thing really launches you forward. This is great for both map traversal and even better for repositioning mid-combat to get some quick burst damage in. Your special does the opposite of the default one, damaging you for 25%, but also refilling your gauge by 25%, which is great if you want to continue your corrupted form a little longer. But at the cost of health, it's a little risky. At least you only get 2 charges, so it's pretty hard to go overboard with it. Void Fiend is my S+ rank hero. He is my number 1, he is my baby boy, and I love him, and you should play him too. Survivors of the Void was a tremendous start to Risk of Rain's DLC cycle, seeing as it pretty much added a new layer to the looting aspect of your runs with these Void Seed events that challenge you with unique enemies and rewards. Along with 2 of my favorite survivors in the game and a host of build-defining items, it just feels better to play with Survivors of the Void enabled. I would have liked maybe 1 more Void enemy though, which is probably just being cheeky at this point, but I feel weird when it just goes from barnacle to infected enemy to a spider tanks. You know, something in between, like a medium-sized void creature. But that's just me looking for things to complain complain about at this point. This DLC was left to cook in the oven for just the right amount of time, and afterwards, Hopoo decided to leave Risk of Rain 2 there and go off and make Risk of Rain Returns. And honestly, I'm happy for them. But Gearbox came and scooped up the IP and have been doing some great things with it, honestly. They previously developed a console version of the game, which gave it a bit of infamy, but you know, we had high hopes. Seekers of the Storm was released to some mixed reviews.
Commando only. Wait, what? What is this? 85 Monster Teeth, 35 Roll of Pennies, 442 Hardlight Afterburners. Yo, it's tied to FPS, you're right! Massive rod, the ramrod that comes down from outer space. Bro, everything is tied to the FPS. So, welcome to the Chump Chateau. Quite.
But what started as a detriment to the game turned into a great stepping stone forward for Gearbox's handling of the game. Releasing as a buggy mess with a mix of items that just felt out of place or uninspired, they turned it around with their roadmap, focusing major balance updates and reworks on different sections of the game to bring to what it is now of just a more satisfying and fulfilling way to play the game. Since all these changes are history now, it feels great to just be able to talk about all of them without expecting any of them to go out of date in a month or two, like all of my Kill Team videos. Seekers of the Storm brings a host of new maps along with some variations to existing ones, a new artifact, 3 new survivors, new skins for existing survivors, 3 new enemies, new shrines, hell yes, 2 new elites, and 17 new items. Along with this, as what seems to be a running theme between expansions now, we have a new final boss in the form of the False Sun, who can be accessed via an alt route. To get onto this mysterious alt pad, you need to play Shrine Economics, baby. Cougher up, you're gonna pray with your pockets, costing you about 300 gold at base value altogether. This shrine will drain your gold until it's full, and even spawn some stone golems to give you some extra change. If you don't think you can pay the full thing, then you can end it early as long as you filled it up at least by a quarter. To spawn a Gilded Halcyon Knight, which can be difficult, but if you beat him, you get rewarded with items depending on how much gold they took from you. Strong wording, but it's true. After that, you just hop into the green portal that spawns and get onto those new store maps. But what are those new maps, you may be asking? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I was going to talk about them anyway. We know how the structure of the video works now. For the stage 1 map, so not part of the alt pad, we have Shattered Abodes, a wide open map with a central circular structure surrounded by ruined buildings. While not part of the alt pad, just like I said with Survivors of the Void, more variation is very welcome in a game where looping is the main mechanic. If you made it onto the alt pad, you'll find yourself in a reformed altar at the foot of a colossal statue. Underneath this big statue, you can find a kitchen with a dormant robot who we might come back to later. Once you beat the teleporter here, the next green portal will open for you to continue your pilgrimage to the Treeborn Colony, a series of platforms set high in the trees that were above where you previously were. This map is actually pretty fun to traverse, since most of the jumps here are pretty safe and make you feel like you're making a lot of ground, especially with those vines you can use to traverse under the platforms. Beating this stage will bring you to the final stage of the alt path, Meridian Prime. As soon as you arrive here, you can see the whole course you'll have to traverse to reach the boss while being attacked by strong enemies and even bosses. Dodge the lightning on the way up, as it'll give you a debuff that'll increase damage received by 10% and decreases healing by 20%. You can run past most of the enemies and make your way to the top where some item forges are, and I'll admit, these reds have saved me a few times, but that could just be really good RNG. Once you reach the mountain's peak, you'll be faced with the False Sun, a colossal stone warrior with a club and spiked projectiles. This boss fight to me is a lot like Mitrix if you expect mostly to focus on melee. The False Sun will wind up attacks, teleport, and then swing, so don't take your eyes off of him, and don't stop moving or else you'll get bonked into oblivion. The first phase is fairly manageable with some movement and a few drones to work as distractions. In the second phase, a bunch of stone golems will spawn and more will respawn, but there will always be around 5 at any given moment. The False Sun also gains a new attack where he has a giant statue in the background death laser you for a bajillion damage. This attack, catching me off guard, is how I usually die to this boss, so do keep an eye out for it since it will decimate your health bar. In the final phase, the stone golems are removed and the False Sun gains a new move where he disables all of your abilities for 4 minutes, unless you interact with an Aurelionite geode to be cleansed or with Ben's raincoat. Other than that, you just want to mostly control your distance with him, seeing as if you make one slip up, it could mean near instant death. However, if you do beat him, you unlock one of God's greatest creations, another shrine. This one lets you offer an item to be received at the start of the next run with the respective artifact enabled, so if you want to start with spare drone parts, then just go right ahead and deposit one. Using this without a deposited item will just have you start with a random one instead, which I think is really fun and I actually do it fairly often. There is still one last map, however, as we have finally received our umbral reward, a new stage 5 map, the Hellmint Hatchery, aka Hell. Again. Here is where you'll get quickly accustomed to the new magma worm enemies that burrow underground and burst out underneath you. The elite versions of these ones can really catch me off guard. I always feel like they have less health than they actually do. This map also features these small little tunnels that can give you a nice boost around the map. All the new altars from the previous stages and this one can be found in these locations. Finally, I feel like I'd be doing this DLC a disservice if I waited any longer to talk about the new survivors, Seeker, Chef, and False Sun. This being Gearbox's first run of characters is a great start and makes me excited for Alloy Collective. While I do personally prefer the gameplay of Survivors of the Void DLC, I will admit I find these survivors to have more flavor and interesting mechanics overall. The Seeker will be your default survivor of the expansion, possibly one of the most team-orientated survivors, having the ability to not only heal but revive allies and herself. By whatever means she uses to prey, she can use stacks of tranquility to boost her stats by 7%, up to 7 times. And upon the 7th, she will revive any dead players and also give herself a free revive for the stage. With that alone, this character is boosted to S tier, and I know I was talking about being happy with this game, not getting too many changes because of the roadmap being done, but expect this to be reworked in one way or another because it's just busted. Well, let's get on to her actual abilities then, starting with her primary, Spirit Punch. It's a 3-hit combo where the first 2 hits deal a moderate amount of damage, but then the 3rd hit is this really big fist that explodes for a lot more damage. This last hit also deals more damage the more tranquility you have, so make sure you're being as tranquil as possible while you're killing your enemies. The primary can feel a little bit janky at first, but then in these big moments you get into this nice zen zone of alternating your targets depending on your shot, and it feels really nice. Your secondary, Unseen Hand, has you summon a 3rd, more large fist from the ground below that goes through enemies. It's a nice way to deal with a small cylinder of foes, and also heals you for each enemy hit, and guess what? The amount healed is increased by tranquility. Pray. It's also more effective than you'd think for disposing of flying enemies, much more than its alternative, at least Soul Spiral, which creates orbs that spiral around you. Isaac players unite. Come on, how are you even gonna line these things up in combat? You need some insane movement. Oh, Sojourn exists. Sojourn, your utility skill, gives you an effect similar to Volcanic Egg, except you explode on impact with terrain or by activating the ability again, and you start taking damage after 2 seconds, but as long as you're not dead, you can stay in Sojourn. This, combined with your balls, can lead to some insane damage output for very little effort. Your alternative utility Respite turns you into a projectile that you can steer that gets faster the longer it continues. You gain barrier for each stack of tranquility you have, and the ability lasts until impact or your barrier runs out, creating a cyclone that heals allies and damages enemies. I haven't had enough time to play around with this since the update just got released, or at least it was while I'm recording this, but I personally prefer it just for the ability to crash into battle and start killing enemies with a cool entrance. I like to look cool, what can I say? Speaking of looking cool, meditating. Meditate gives me flashbacks to Malevolent Creek every time I activate it, and has the audacity to give me tranquility afterwards, the bastard. You also deal damage in the area and heal your allies, which adds to the aura meter. But what if you were even more like a warrior monk? Well then we have Prayer True Fist, Palm Blast. If the QuickTime events are a bit too much for you, then you can go face instead, with a palm. You can charge this up and launch it at enemies or heal allies. Hitting 3 enemies will give you barrier and tranquility. However, if you take this, it won't revive you or give your team a free revive either. Which does suck, but you get a more consistent damage option in your ability cycle, so there's a fair trade-off. Honestly, a really solid default survivor for a DLC, with the ability to help your teammates, but also really fun playing solo. Chef is the returning survivor from the first game, being unlocked at the Sheltered Sanctuary after you give him a bison steak, slug, and infusion, and you can do this across multiple runs. Chef went through a pretty rough stage of being the worst survivor in the game, coming out as a pretty fun survivor with a really fun cooldown cycle. With your passive, you pretty much have an inbuilt Monstitude, allowing you to endure high pressure combat the same way I combated high pressure fast food environments in the past. Your primary throws out 3 cleavers that stop and come back after a while. Holding down the fire button has them return when you let go, while tapping it will have them return after a short delay. And I'll admit that mixing up my primaries with fast shots or sustained shots depending on my targets is such a seamless switch that it turns this primary from previously being one of the worst in game to definitely being one of the most satisfying to use at the very least. Your secondary has you unlock your chest oven and flash burn your enemies, stacking a bunch of burn in the process. Seeing as there is no flame-centric survivor, Gearbox, I beg you, add a pyromaniac. Any survivor with flame ability is always appreciated, especially for that ignition tank value. The range on this is also deceptively long, so don't be afraid to use it a bit early since you might be surprised. The alternative version gives you an icebox instead, which has significantly less damage and cooldown, no burn debuff, but does have 2 charges and can freeze after 6 stack. Each use fires 3 shots, so you have to hit all of your shots with both twice to get the effect. However, this is a free execute on enemies around 30 to 40% HP. Like all other freezing effects, this can be used on Mitrix to get a bunch of free damage, as well as elites that may otherwise pose a threat. Personally, I go for the firebox because Ignition Tank go burr, but both are valid picks for your secondary option. Your utility skill roll is the reason they took my poor boy's legs and replaced them with Cylinder. This boosts you a good deal and can do some pretty reasonable damage. I always find myself using this in combat as a genuine answer to enemies like beetles, as at full charge, which doesn't take too long, it does 600% damage, which is enough to proc bans. Literally, as soon as this is off cooldown, I use it again, regardless of whether I'm in combat or not. And it has some pretty good control on it, so you can even hit enemies multiple times. Your alternative, Oil Spill, has Chef twirl into the air and bounce up to 4 times, dealing damage each time he lands. You can hold the ability to use it normally, however, if you tap it again before landing, you'll jump even higher and drop some globs of oil. This ability I think is the more fun option, but it doesn't have as much damage potential and horizontal distance as Roll does, which makes me feel like it covers both traversal and damage more effectively, while also still being pretty fun. However, in the past few weeks, I've found that Oil Spill is actually really good mid-combat because the enemies just can't hit you half the time because you're moving too fast. I think it's definitely worth a try. I could see a lot of people preferring this one over Roll. Glaze has you launch balls of oil at enemies, dealing a good chunk of damage and leaves pools of oil, much like Oil Spill. Igniting these or freezing them with your secondary will have them deal burn damage or freeze enemies, and over a pretty wide area too. The alternative, however, buffs your next ability with a new effect, like 16 cleavers in every direction instead of 1, flame pools, big ice cube, bleed on your rolls for some reason, and always having ignited frozen oil pills with Oil Spill. It's really hard to gauge this skill's effectiveness since it is essentially 5 skills, though you can only use 3 of them, but if you don't think you need the damage from Glaze in your rotation, then this skill is pretty good for just making your other ones overall better or having more use. Chef has an amazing ability cycle, has great movement, his flavor is amazing, and has a wonderful primary, though my only gripe would be I don't feel my primary changing as much throughout the runs as I do with other survivors, though that could just be with the few runs that I've had. It's still a pretty recent DLC. However, Chef went from being my least favorite survivor to being in my top 5. I actually really like this character, and he's usually one of my go-tos when I'm just hopping on to play anyway. The last survivor of the game currently, and the secret survivor of the DLC, though he wasn't much more secret than Chef, other than we just didn't know exactly who it was until launch. False Sun brings you dreams of a Strength Fate Souls build to Risk of Rain 2. False Sun is unlocked after beating him on stage 4 with Aurelionite, who will turn against you in the end in a really cool twist compared to the Mitric fight. Beating him like this will unlock him as a playable character, and you pretty much get access to all the attacks he had, and they feel just as great. His passive is a mechanic called Growth, where getting more health from items increases some of your ability's charges, like your Lunar Spikes, each of which held gives a buff, and so does each one used. So you start off with 4 Lunar Spikes. Each one held gives you a plus 5% attack speed bonus and a plus 2.5% armor bonus, for a 20% attack speed buff and 10% armor buff. However, if you use all 4 of these spikes, you'd get plus 5% movement speed and 2.5% regeneration for each use, being a 20% and a 10% buff altogether again. This, along with his above average health and armor stat, heavily encourages you to increase your defensive items by rewarding you with offensive abilities and passive buffs. This alone makes the Survivor S tier for me, just for being a really cool mechanic to engage with for the duration of my run, and also just feeling like an actual boss, which is very rare for games to pull off well. Your primary is a big club that swings for 450% damage, or can be charged by holding your secondary along with it for 1000% damage. Both of these options are pretty silly in terms of how much damage they do, your slam being able to one-shot most early game enemies with a pretty reasonable radius. The best time to use it is when you can get on top of a boss and just start battering the club down on them repeatedly. Your secondary, Lunar Spikes, has 4 charges and can damage enemies for 200%, while also applying Lunar Ruin, the debuff that the False Sun would have applied to you during his boss fight. However, this version just increases damage received by 10%, and can stack similarly to Bleed, where every new stack resets debuff times. And with a 4-second cooldown, you can keep Lunar Ruin up as long as you don't miss. Not only is this a quick 4 hits of 200% damage each, but also gives you those passive buffs for when you do use them, the health regen especially helpful for melee combat. Your alternative is Lunar Stakes, which has half as many charges as Lunar spikes, but pierces enemies and causes them to get hit by a follow-up lightning strike, both of which inflict a stack of lunar ruin. For your passive buffs, each stake just counts as 2 spikes, so you're not missing out much on growth. While it takes longer to build, I find this ability much more impactful as a way of dealing damage, and not just machine gunning my enemies with lunar spikes. Also, the piercing shot is great for hitting multiple enemies, especially with the follow-up lightning strikes. Once again, this is personal preference, but these skills are affected by specials too, so take those into account. Your default utility is 2 charges of a blink that can also damage any enemies you move through. In combat, you can charge up your club and then teleport to keep you safe while vulnerable, and can also be used to get on top of larger enemies to perform the previously mentioned battering of their skulls. Or if you would prefer, you can instead teleport and explode, damaging enemies at your destination, pulling in enemies and tripling your growth for 4 seconds. That last effect's duration can also be increased by growth, but I assume it doesn't affect itself, otherwise it would be infinite. I usually just go for the teleport since I think it looks cooler, and it's affected by growth, a mechanic which I like, but its range is a slight bit disappointing, and Step of the Brothers has far more use in terms of traversal. Last up is the specials, which are both high range, high power laser options. Laser of the Father dealing 240% to a whopping 1400% damage per second with no limit to range. There is damage fall off, but with this duration, which gets longer with growth, you will have no problem sniping enemies, especially with on-hit items that will still proc at their normal rate. I cannot stress enough how powerful this makes you feel, especially since it will replenish your Lunar Spike, so you can just throw out another volley as soon as you're done. I haven't met anyone who doesn't love this ability, and honestly, it's probably because it's busted. The alternative, Laser Burst, is much weaker in terms of raw damage, but I think has a lot more utility that complements your other abilities, particularly how it refills half of your Lunar Spikes. Now, half is marginally less, but Laser Burst is just a single shot, meaning you can fire your Lunar Spikes, use this, and then fire off 50% more directly afterwards. However, this ability, much like Lunar Spikes, also increases in uses with growth, meaning that you can hold on to multiple of these at a time. So, after a while, your build just turns into a ranged build where you alternate between spikes and lasers before you run out, batter enemies with your melee, refuel, and wreak havoc again. I commend Gearbox for making a survivor with abilities that complement each other without relying on each other. Each of these has the ability to perform tremendously on their own, but when you start intertwining them, the game rewards you with passive buffs and free refills. I can't believe it. I actually finished the script. I've been doing this for like a week and a half. I am actually just remembering that I still need to re-record that bit on the proc coefficients because I realized I did the entire script without talking about proc coefficients or how procs just work at all. So now I'm also going to have to write that and do that up. And I hope that it's good, because I'm pretty sure that's going to be really hard to do. Okay, so when you heard me earlier in the middle of the video talking about all the things I missed, this is the me now that was from back then. Like, I'm recording this right after this. The timeline is so jumbled right now. Risk of Rain 2 means a lot to me, as well as the other Risk of Rain games. Not only is, like, the artistic expression of, like, the gameplay just so beautiful, like, the way every character just feels completely different. It's like you're playing Root on a video game. That's a very, very obscure reference. I used to watch Huts play a lot of Binding of Isaac when he was really big for doing that, and not too long afterwards he started uploading Risk of Rain 2 videos. I remember watching them at first and I was like, nope, I don't understand what's going on here. This makes like zero sense to me. I didn't even know there were stages. I didn't know how the game worked at all. All I knew was that it was a roguelike. And then Moist Critical played it. At the time I really liked him. I think he's cool now. But at the time I was obsessed. So I saw him play it and I was like, well, I'm going to listen to Critical talk anyway, so I might as well watch the video. And it was when he started like playing different characters and was like, oh my god, this is so different, oh! And I was like, I need it. And I got it like literally straight away. I don't think I stopped playing that game for so long. And the reason I made this video is because I've been playing it again. I decided, hey, I want to just play this game, especially with the DLCs coming out recently. The DLCs, they're really good. You should definitely buy them. They're always like half off as well. Like €7 for all of this. It's amazing. I went through a really long phase of trying to beat the game and then doing it with every character on Monsoon, which I haven't done, by the way. Like I said, I'm not very good at this game. I actually have no idea who I haven't done it with off the top of my head. And I've done like a few Eclipse runs. I don't really like Eclipse that much. I don't like feeling less powerful. I want to feel more powerful. But you know, it's power fantasy, that's all it is. But that is possibly my single favorite thing about this entire game. Like, considering everything I've just said, my favorite thing about this game that I wish more games did is you can play this however you want. And I don't mean like, you know, you pick a survivor that matches your playstyle. Whoa. You can play this on any difficulty. You can use whichever artifacts you want, whichever DLCs you want. You can customize your own experience to suit you. Do you not like the RNG of the items? You don't have to deal with it. Like the amount of enemies, if you want more, it's beautiful. It is so beautiful that you can see they kept the player's experience in mind here. I love it. I genuinely love this game. I think I stopped playing Risk of Rain 2 originally when Survivors of the Void came out because I was playing on console at the time. I had my PC. I was doing YouTube back then. And Survivors of the Void came out. I got on PC. But I'm going to admit this now, and this is probably going to be the most detrimental thing to my career. I mostly game on console, and I have a PC. Though, in fairness, my PC is like €300. But I was playing around with mouse and keyboard, which was pretty fun on Railgunner. Like, I'm not bad. I used to play TF2 a lot, and I played Minecraft on PC as well. But like, I'm not a seasoned gamer with it, so it just became like a bit of a slugfest for me. Getting frustrated just knowing that if I was using my controller, I would be doing a lot better. And yeah, I could connect a controller to my PC, but that's a lot of effort for a system that I don't have all of my achievements in memory on anyway. However, I do really want to mess around with the mods. I haven't gone around to it yet because, you know, first time modding without like using the Steam Workshop is kind of intimidating. I know it only takes 2 minutes. Everyone keeps telling me, but like starting it is a process. Another thing I love about this game is the community is so lovely. We got leading YouTubers like Wooly, Disputed Origins, and R&D Tuesday, whose streams I love, by the way. If you like this game, watch his streams. They're amazing. Along with like Wooly as well, who gave me permission to use that clip earlier in the video, and I almost cried. I was so happy. I just cut out like 2 minutes of me gushing over how happy it made me, so you're welcome. Anyway, I'm rambling for way too long. Just buy the fucking game already. I started crying for fuck's sake.